cast away. Alienated from the aids of added nature in disguise. Ideas ahead of time dismissed with narrow eyes. Benefactor boy, dreaming about the world you can't deploy. Changing the system, but treated like a toy. Ideas misunderstood, but brilliance is his boy. Benefactor boy, can't you hear his voice? Talking about 0 point, the points lost on them. Counter structures crumbling from the same old stem. They laugh like I'm crazy, but I see it all so clear. Exploited paper, unheard injustice, burning ears. Fighting for a change in this wasteland of noise. But they call me foolish when I teach and boys. Benefactor boy, dreaming about the world he can't deploy. Changing the system, but treated like a toy. Ideas misunderstood, but brilliance is his boy. Benefactor boy, can't you hear his voice?
All right, welcome, and welcome back to Beneficence TV Live, everybody. I'm your host, the Benefactor, your guide here on Beneficence TV into everything forbidden science we're going to get into tonight. So buckle up, because we just hit a whole new level with my Lightning Thief mod that I've been working on, and specifically the asymmetric resonant driver that we've been building. This week's experiments weren't just good, okay? They literally rewrote what I thought I understood about back EMF, dipole preservation, and synthetic AC in our system, right? So we'll give you the rundown in a few moments. Before I dive into my latest theory, the field cavitation theory, I do want to walk you through some of these breakthroughs I had last night. The ones that led me to a new working understanding of this system. And you know, just to be clear, this isn't some idea I arbitrarily pulled out of my ass, okay? I built this on actual established physical principles combined with my own observations and insights from working directly with these vortex coils. So here's the quick recap for anyone new to my work, so today's discoveries actually make sense to you. I've been building and experimenting with a type of coil called a vortex coil, or it's a variation, rather, of the rodent coil called the Abha coil, which is also just a type of vortex coil with a specific winding pattern. It's not wired like a normal inductor, though. Its geometry focuses the magnetic field in a very unusual way, creating an intense flux collapse and resonance very easily. By using two channels of counter-rotating energy, you produce two counter-rotating electromagnetic fields that condense and compress on top of each other in such a way that establishes a 0 point on the void space on the or 0 point or a void space on the equatorial plane between the two counter-rotating fields. Now, to drive the system, my lab partner and I developed a pulse power circuit. Basically, it's a modified version of the Joule Thief, a very simple circuit that uses a transistor to send very fast pulse on and off pulses of energy into the coil. So when those pulses shut off, the magnetic field that's generated with the electricity collapses, and it collapses violently. And it releases what's called back EMF, or the return pulse, that normally gets wasted in conventional electronics. Vortex coils are notorious for producing enormous amounts of back EMF compared to regular helical coils. So most systems waste this back EMF energy because it's destructive by nature. You know, sometimes it contains a massive energy spike, but that massive energy spike can be harnessed in what Tesla referred to as impulse technology. My system doesn't waste that impulse. Okay, it redirects it, sends it back to the battery's negative terminal instead of being directed back into the circuit for recirculation through the negative terminal of the circuit. The result is that instead of charging the battery, like you would actually think of in terms of thinking of ideas when trying to close the loop in your system, you think, oh, you just want to charge the battery while you're using it if you have extra energy. But no, this works a little bit different. So it doesn't charge the battery, it slows down the battery's discharge. In theory, at least. These are theories of mine. They're working theories, and I could be wrong. And If I'm wrong, that's fine, because at the end of the day, it just means that I've learned something about the system. But my working theory is that it's actually slowing down the battery's discharge and supplementing the destruction of the dipole, which is something John Bedini hinted about, but nobody really explored the way that I'm doing here with these coils. So what I've discovered last night in my setup basically boils down to 4 major things. This system powers a load normally with forward EMF. Before, we were thinking it was actually powered with the synergy between the back EMF and forward EMF, since it's an AC LED panel. And it doesn't really, like, you can drive the panel, you can power the panel with pulsed DC, but not just straight up DC. But when you pulse the DC, you have to pulse it fast enough or you'll see it blinking. So this is actually what I discovered might be happening to the load side of the circuit. But it is still using the synergy effect, and I'll explain that in a minute. So, discovery number 2. The system captures the back EMF and redirects it towards the negative battery terminal to preserve the dipole, making the battery last far longer. Now, it doesn't completely eliminate the drain from the dipole, but it does supplement the drain enough for it to increase the efficiency to a point where we're kind of questioning where this extra power is coming from in the system. When we analyze it compared to a normal inverter, that inverter was like 74% efficient. And we analyzed the panel being powered at the same brightness using a lux meter, measuring it. 74% efficient, and on the same amount of energy from the same battery, 12.2 watt hours of energy, the inverter only lasted about 3 hours, while this system lasted over 15 hours. So we were questioning it. We can't really gauge the efficiency. It's really hard to measure negative electricity. If you're listening to people like John Bedini, he emphasizes you can't really measure this type of energy with traditional meters. The closest thing you can get is an analog meter. We do have an analog meter, and I'll go over some of those readings in a minute. And apparently, by discovering, and I did this fairly early on when experimenting with Michel's modified ABBA excitation circuit that we're using, when working with the system and trying to tune it and balance it, I noticed fairly early on that I could actually disconnect the input power negative terminal. Okay, so there's an input power and then there's an output power to the system, right? You got the input power from the source battery. I can disconnect the input of the negative side and just connect the negative output directly to the negative terminal of the battery. And that's what I discovered fairly early on of doing this. It doesn't disturb the brightness at all, but it actually makes the drain a lot less, right? It decreased it, I believe, from like 35 millivolts per hour to only like 15. It was in steady 15 millivolts per hour on the battery. That's basically nothing. So that's, you know, powering this thing. Albeit it was a little bit less bright than this. We tuned it recently and got a little bit more brightness out of it. So it's going to drain the battery a little bit faster. But if we calculate that and adjust it according to the original results, we can see if it's, you know, the same, which I haven't actually done yet, but it's on my list of things to do. I do have a day job. But, okay, so moving on to discovery number 3. The system resonates like a high Q coil around 2 kilohertz, not 1 kilohertz like we thought before. Okay, so this means it behaves more like a tuned resonator than an ordinary circuit, though, which means we have to balance. This was my original theory, that we had to balance the components accordingly. And this matches that. But originally, we measured the frequency with the oscilloscope while the load was connected, the 40-watt panel. We're getting around 1 kilohertz. And I assumed that since our resonance range for the closed circuit was around the same, using a somewhat similar method, not exactly the same closed circuit, but a similar method with a stereo amp receiver, we were getting voltage stepping up at around 1 kilohertz. So I was like, okay, this seems to match. Maybe this is the range. Nope, it's not the range. So I found out by disconnecting the load, right? And this kind of, you don't really want to do that because you don't want to risk destroying the transistor. I do have a protection neon lamp in parallel with the transistor, with the collector and the emitter. That gives some level of protection, but still, you know, I'm not willing to risk it for a biscuit here. These transistors, I only have a handful of them, and we have a lot of testing to do. So, I decided recently to experiment by tuning in and getting it a little brighter. So, I hooked up a higher resistance to the neon lamp, so it's able to handle a little bit more current now. So I wasn't too worried about it. But when turning it off, we discovered that it produced not 1 kilohertz frequency range, but 2 kilohertz frequency range, and that means that's probably its natural resonant frequency that we're going to be aiming for, and we were probably off by a whole kilohertz. And this is very important because this is actually the range that I kind of smelt a burning air smell. I'm not really sure what ozone's supposed to smell like, but I noticed something slightly burning, like a burnt smell in the air as soon as it started humming really loud, and I disconnected the load. And you're not supposed to do this with the open circuit method, but I've never heard it actually ionizing the air into ozone with a closed circuit method. But it is, I guess it's possible, because I did smell something, and as soon as I turned off the power to the circuit, I stopped smelling it. So we know that 2 kilohertz is probably the range that is its peak resonance range, where we're going to have the highest Q factor, as it were. And moving on to the last discovery, it does create synthetic AC, where the forward and the back EMF interact to create kind of a dual polarity oscillation using somewhat of a superposition between the two, a synergy effect. But it's not using that while going to the load. And I'll explain that further, but we've kind of discovered using these measurements that most of the back EMF is being redirected to the battery already, which is insane. So to add a capacitor or a cap bank to the negative side instead of the positive side, which we were trying to do last night, adding it to maybe the negative side this time will definitely yield some better results, I think. And we don't really have to modify it that much. Unfortunately, I don't have the capacitor values right now to do that test. I really would like to, because all evidence points to me accidentally stumbling upon a method that already is preserving the dipole to some extent. So regarding the ozone, okay, under some conditions, the coil produces ozone, ionization, and extremely high negative voltage spikes. All right, when dwelling on it last night and thinking about how plasmoids form under the plasmoid unification model, this led me to develop the idea of field cavitation. If plasmoids are what taking place and causing some of the unique phenomenon in the coil, field cavitation kind of makes sense. And you can think about it as an electromagnetic cousin of water cavitation. And we're going to play a video here so you can get a recap of what bubble cavitation is. But basically, I was theorizing that maybe the two collapsing fields, the two collapsing counter-rotating fields, may create a tiny void that kind of snaps shut and forms a microplasmoid structure. This kind of ties directly into the plasmoid unification model, giving us somewhat of a bridge between theoretical plasmoids and practical hardware use of them, if it's proven true. Now, there's a couple of other pieces of evidence that lead me to believe this is actually happening. One of them, a colleague of mine, Gerald, has... Oh, low battery. A colleague of mine has been... give me 1 second, low battery. has been running these kinds of tests, similar tests with similar coils. Not the same winding pattern, but still considered vortex winding patterns. And he specifically preserved his in acrylic or some kind of resin. And after running it for a while, he noticed these little holes being formed in the resin. Now, this would make sense if there's a lot of, plasmoids being formed. They would be eating away at this this material, or potentially they could be eating away at this material when they discharge. If you have, like, maybe an unstable system where they're kind of, like, uncontrollable. And then the other piece of evidence that I was thinking about is, okay, so even Daniel Nunez himself said, okay, so in one configuration of the coil, you get a monopole, okay? You get the same pole on both sides of the coil. You know, put it in the top, put it in the bottom, the same, right? I believe it's the south side. I could be mistaken. Anyways, the other configuration produces one pole and then a void. So that void leads me to believe that that is actual evidence. And we've documented that void as well with our magnetic monopole detector. So we've captured the monopole, and we've also captured the single pole and kind of void area. So this is evidence that there could be some kind of plausibility to field cavitation being the mechanism of action, leading to some of the unique phenomenon in the coil, specifically the influx of back EMF, because you're not supposed to get back EMF voltage above the input voltage. If you put in 12 volts, you're only supposed to get back a 12 volt spike of back EMF. That's the laws of energy of conservation, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. But no, these coils produce a lot more back EMF than the input voltage. They step up voltage on a 1-to-1 coil ratio, which is in and of itself fucking weird. I'd like you to try that with a helically wound coil. It just won't happen. It acts as a transformer on a 1-to-1 ratio without a ferrite core around it to condense that flux inside the material. No, it condenses itself just with the field geometry. So, in short, I might have apparently built what can only be described as an asymmetric resonant vortex coil system that recycles energy, preserves the battery dipole, creates synthetic AC, and may be demonstrating early signs of field cavitation. Now, I haven't actually explained the asymmetric part of the system, but we'll go into that in a minute. So the mechanics behind plasmoids, right? Some of the results from last night have shown exactly why the system behaves like it does. We are finally putting the final pieces of the puzzle together after almost 2 years of working on this system. And that brings us to all the breakthroughs. So we're going to break that down. I'm actually going to take a quick break because my voice is starting to crack. Yeah, we'll take a quick 5-minute break. We'll let people catch up if they're just tuning in, so they can skip forward and tune in live. That's why I like to do some breaks, because if people join in late, and I have a couple of breaks in there, they can actually use those breaks to skip forward and catch up to the live content and interact and chat in if they want to, ask questions, comments, concerns, all that stuff. So again, I really want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. I really do appreciate all the love and support. We will be giving away free memberships. I know I haven't really uploaded a lot of content recently due to my job, but that's slowing down. So I will be speeding up the content for members only on the Patreon and the YouTube channels. They both get the same members only content. So if you would like to support my research, the easiest way to do so, if you don't have any money, is just to not skip the ads. But the way to do so, if you can, if you have the funds, please join my Patreon or my YouTube memberships. They really do help me fund some of this research. I am working on a shoestring budget here. But I'm open sourcing everything to you guys. I'm not keeping anything to myself. Maybe a couple of things that I could potentially make a little money off of if I'm in a bad spot. But outside of that, everything important, all the standardization of this process needs to be open sourced, and all of the efficiency gains and the techniques that we've tried and haven't tried, and tried and failed and tried and succeed, everything, all of that data is important here, needs to be documented, and it needs to be kept open to the public so that others can learn from it. This is a learning process for everybody, me included. Okay, so if you're just learning this stuff, just note that everybody is. So we're all in the same boat here. So with that, we're gonna go to a quick break. If you haven't hit that like button, please do so. Subscribe for more revolutionary content, and we'll be back with more.
In a world where innovation is stifled by greed and corruption, there lies a hidden truth that could revolutionize our way of life.
Lenny, what are you doing? Are you seriously pitching a new show right now? I didn't authorize this. My God, only 5 minutes into your new position as co-host, and you're already adding to my tight schedule.
Yes, sir, I manage that schedule. But I did notice you have an entire 2 days available during your week.
Wait, you're not talking about Saturday and Sunday, are you?
Of course, sir. You have 2 whole days where you're free to work on new content.
Lenny, those are my days off.
It's okay, sir. I know you'll manage just fine. I have faith in you.
Do robots have faith?
I do. I have faith that you won't screw it up again.
You know what? It's fine. Go ahead. I'll just build my cold fusion Lego set some other time.
It's PON certified.
But I'm not telling them about my idea for a thunderstorm toilet. I'm gonna keep that baby close to my chest.
You know, that just sounds wrong.
It's a good idea. A toilet capable of turning any toxic human waste into, well, it turns into petroleum jelly.
Why petroleum jelly, sir?
You know what? I'm not sure. I don't think it's calibrated correctly.
Enough is enough. The world is at a breaking point. Catastrophic climate change, biosphere collapse, and a global energy crisis have been met with apathy, denial, and despair. The phrase unidentified flying object is a deliberately obfuscating term. What it really is an alternative energy and propulsion device. This is the real reason for the secrecy. These technologies, if they were disclosed, would end fossil fuels, pollution, and poverty overnight, and usher in a new era of abundance, freedom, and peace. Instead, they have been kept secret for over 100 years.
The more powerful the agency, the more powerful the group, the more powerful the cartel, the more they will resort not only to legal means, but to extra legal means to suppress their competition.
I said pretty early on, the problem is suppression. It wasn't really how do I make a free energy machine. It's how do I not get suppressed? Because what's the point?
Microscopic ball lightnings that when they discharge are tapping into that 0-point energy field and creating the motive force.
Boom! That's why the concussion from the thunderclap is so huge. There's this huge amount of energy that's actually sourced from the vacuum energy. All the dots connected. This is what's happening, right? So we need to make the thunderclap engine.
Imagine a future where clean, sustainable energy is not just a dream, but a reality. Discover the countless untold stories of free energy devices and the relentless battle against those who seek to suppress them for their own gain.
Black shelving. So someone comes along, they offer you $20 million for your device, it's a corporation, they put it on a shelf. Boom.
This power is something I have given my life for you the people.
Uncover the shocking tactics used by energy industries to control the narrative and maintain their grip on power.
You don't interfere with the big, powerful people. You don't put them out of business. They still have those 50-year leases on the lines and all the power transformers.
The Environmental Protection Agency is a bit of a dictatorial police agency.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy,
power-raising mechanism and the ability to pursue his own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
This is real, usable power. It's stable. It is not transient. It is not noise. Behind the lamps, that little box is putting out all of that power, well over 500 watts, and yet it is receiving less than 1/3 of a milliwatt of input power. The rest of that power is coming out of the surging energy of the vacuum, and this little box that you see right here, solid state, no moving parts, is the vacuum triode that's doing this very practical and historical work.
But indeed it put out more energy than it took in.
He was shot at once with a silenced rifle from about 300 yards. It reads like a James Bond movie, but it's real.
There are men here that said they're FBI, and they got black vans, and they're taking all this equipment. What should I do?
It's called capture, where they try to rationalize away this problem and everything's fine.
From manipulation of patent authorities to infiltration of government agencies, the truth is stranger than fiction. But amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerges in the form of renegade scientists and inventors who refuse to be silenced.
There is absolutely no question that T. Henry Morey had a system that produced about 50 kilowatts out of a 55-pound box.
In the shadows of capitalism's dark secrets, join us on a thrilling new show. Get ready to be inspired, enraged, and empowered as we delve into the Benefactor's Guide to Free Energy Devices.
Only on Beneficence TV.
In base lab alone with my mind. Straight old theories they all refuse to find. I've been working on energy for a brand new day, but even in the crowd I'm still a castaway. Alienated from the A's of added mentor in disguise. Ideas ahead of time, dismissed with narrow eyes. Benefactor boy, dreaming about the
All right, welcome back to Beneficence TV Live. Society of High Sciences tunes commented in 1-to-1 coil ratio with the same wire size? Question mark. Yes. With this coil, we can produce a transformer effect, step up the voltage quite a bit with a 1-to-1 coil ratio with the same wire size. I believe we're using 24 AWG. What we do is we take the same wire and we wind it back 24 times, and then we twist it with a electric drill, and then we wind it around our coil frame, and then we split that bundle of multifilar wires off into 2 channels. This allows electricity to go in 2 directions at the same time. Okay, so going into the discoveries we had last night with the measurements we took. When the 40-watt panel was disconnected from our Lightning Thief system, the system jumped from 1 kilohertz on the frequency range to 2 kilohertz on the oscilloscope. So that tells us a few things. 2 kilohertz is the resonant frequency of the coil itself, or that's what I suspect now. It tells us that the load isn't right, if this is true. So it drags the frequency down to 1 kilohertz, because, again, the light source can act as a capacitor, and capacitors change the frequency of your system. So this means tuning the load to preserve that 2 kilohertz is the key to unlocking even more massive efficiency. This is one of our first signs that the system behaves like a legitimate high Q resonator, not just some simple transistor oscillator that it's described as in the textbooks, the Joule Thief circuit. Number 2, okay, so the back EMF actually turns out to be the main player in the system. Now, this is not surprising, but it's kind of interesting with the results that we got, because it did kind of shock me a little bit with how much we see on the negative side. So we're trying to measure how much voltage is coming out of the system while the LED panel is being powered. Now, with the multimeters, normally I would register around 20 volts, 19 volts, 20 volts, something around there, while the panel's being powered, and even more while it's off. And this is AC measurement. Now, there was some developments last night off camera that I have to go into, but we're going to set the basics here of what happened first, so I don't want to confuse anybody, including myself. So we measured with the oscilloscope this time because since I tuned the base of the coil, it's a lot brighter, right? It might be putting a lot more energy into the output. So that changes things a little bit. And I wasn't able to actually pick up the accurate voltage of the output while the panel was being powered. Or I'm sorry, while the panel was off. So while the panel was off, the multimeters that we were attaching to the output were like jumping on the AC, and the DC just didn't read anything. And they were jumping to like 400, 500 volts. The analog meter showed us off the chart readings with 500 plus volts on both AC and DC range modes. It was like literally off the gauge. Like it wanted to go off the meter. And when we measured things with the oscilloscope, it measured negative 168 volts. 168 volts, negative volts, using DC coupling mode on the output rail, on the output negative rail, and only 10 volts on the positive. So it showed 10 positive volts and 168 negative volts on this output. Honestly, can't remember if that was, I think that's when the light panel was on, we measured that, we took that measurement. So that is insane. This tells us a few things, okay? It tells us the system is overwhelmingly generating and utilizing back EMF. It tells us the positive we think is running everything is actually a small player here. It's only about, it represents about 10 volts of the actual usable. That's why the panel was so low in brightness, right? We're only putting 10 volts into the panel, or less when we detune the base of the circuit. I believe we're seeing a reduction in brightness with the system compared to its default 100% on the wall, because we're only pushing the forward EMF, the 10 volts, to the load, and the rest, the back EMF, the negative, is being recycled into the negative terminal of the battery. Now, it's not a clean recycle. That's why we need a capacitor and a resistor in series with that negative rail, because it's not charging it cleanly. It's only getting little fractions of it. It needs to be timed correctly, and it needs to dump in a smooth fashion. We can't just hook up the negative to the terminal and willy-nilly expect to close the loop fully. So the back EMF, the rest of the current, or the rest of the voltage, the negative 168 volts, is being recycled into the negative terminal of the battery due to the fact that I disconnected the negative return of the circuit itself and just hooked up a branch from the negative output directly to the negative of the battery for ground reference. And when I did this, remember I did this early on, trying to experiment with the system and tune it and find different ways of increasing the efficiency. When I did this, it definitely improved the efficiency, no doubt. I just didn't know exactly why it was doing that until now. So apparently, this may be a legitimate method of easily preserving the dipole in our system, feeding the back EMF back to the dipole to replenish some of the potential that has been lost between the positive and negative terminals of the battery. Remember, keeping that potential difference alive keeps the current flowing in your system. The goal is to preserve that difference in potential for as long as possible. And this all totally fits with my synthetic AC hypothesis that I was going over a few months ago. The load might only be powered by the forward EMF. To summarize, the load might only be powered by the forward EMF, not by the synergy between the forward and back EMF. However, that doesn't mean the synergy isn't being utilized here. It definitely is. But only 10 volts of the positive energy are going into the load, while most of it is going back, most of it or all of it is going back to the battery, the back EMF. So essentially, we're driving a light with an extremely fast pulse DC, while the waveform breaks apart at the diode and recycles back into the battery. Remember, the diode does not allow the back EMF to flow backwards through the positive rail. It can only go back through the negative rail. So it's not going to the light source. Technically, it's going straight back to the battery. That makes sense. So number 3, discovery number 3, the hum gets louder, and I did suspect a moment of ozone when the load is disconnected. When it's disconnected, the coil suddenly screams, like it's a really loud hum. It gets very loud, and it might even be ionizing the air inside the Tor. So this is evidence of classic high field ionization, right? This is ionization behavior. Without a load, energy can't leave the coil, right? It has nowhere to go. So the magnetic field piles up in the core, and you get like this, honestly, I consider it what we would call a true resonance cascade. You're getting resonance, it's built up, but there's nowhere for it to go. It's a cascading effect of resonance, leading to enormous destructive interference. And this is all taking place at the center of the flux collapse, okay? So this all backs up the suspected plasmoid mechanism behind the coil. Discovery number 4. The cap bank actually worked, but it only hit 8 volts. We built a cap bank, kind of, sort of. It was a cap bank on accident, or by consequence, because I didn't actually have a high enough voltage rated 1000 microfarad capacitor. They were all rated 16 volts, so I had to put 2 of them in series, 2 of them in parallel, and then connect them all as one. With, I think we put a 10K ohm resistor, 2 watt resistors in parallel across all 4 of them. Yeah, we walked through the process last night, and it did kind of work. You know, it charged up the cap bank. It didn't, you know, blow up anything. But the cap bank, it turns out, was on the wrong rail. We put it on the positive rail last night, and this discovery, while thinking about it, should have been, the cap bank should have been on the negative rail. So this means the cap bank was catching whatever positive component survived the diode and was left over from the load, plus any reflected energy from the back EMF pulse that makes it through the transistor's path, I guess. So yeah, because we placed it on the positive rail, it didn't capture that spike that's actually being used to feed the dipole via the negative terminal of the battery. So this explains why the cap bank didn't actually work. It didn't do anything. It didn't charge up enough, didn't get enough voltage, because that voltage that we were seeing is all coming from the negative. So the cap bank should be sitting on the negative rail, which will capture the real collapse. That's where the negative 168 volt spikes show up on our oscilloscope. That's the gold mine there, ladies and gentlemen. So the next test, I will employ that cap bank on the negative, but the caveat here is a recent development. When actually this morning, not last night, this morning, I was running the test briefly, trying to monitor the voltage output while the panel was on. And I wasn't getting 20 volts anymore. It was actually reading it. I wasn't getting 20 volts anymore. I was getting 85 volts. And it was DC. It wasn't AC. I'm kind of confused by this, because normally I could only read about 20 volts while the panel's on, and only in AC mode. So this is kind of odd to me. Yeah, when you turn it off, the meters don't really read it at all. You have to use an oscilloscope at that point. Yeah, so now I think about it, the oscilloscope was probably reading it while the panel was off. Yeah, we did turn it off quite a bit, and it was it definitely was ionizing air for a moment. And that ionization can create a conductive path for the coil, maybe at specific node points along the winding pattern. I don't know. This is just a theory, but that could be why we're seeing 85 volts DC now. I have no idea. I could be completely wrong on that, but we're going to have to take precautions and upgrade the capacitor to a higher voltage rating because of that discovery. We're going to need at least 100 volts rating on the capacitor. And we'll probably have to get a series of capacitors just in case the 1000 microfarad doesn't end up being the ideal. We want like a kit, so we can kind of go through a couple of different values to see which one tunes it the best. And what I mean by that is we're going to be looking for drainage on the battery and comparing it to the 15 millivolt drain on the battery that the system normally gets. So the Discovery 5 is something we've been talking about for a while now. It's the back EMF going directly to the negative terminal of the battery, something I didn't realize was actually probably preserving the dipole to some extent, even though it wasn't a clean exchange of energy, because we didn't time it correctly, and we need that that cap, the capacitor and resistor in series with the negative terminal to the battery to actually time that and dump that energy smoothly back into the battery. But regardless, we might be preserving the dipole here. And Bedini always said, you know, you can't charge a battery with negative electricity. And he wasn't wrong, right? You can't charge a battery with negative electricity, right? But what he meant was you can't charge a battery with raw, ultra-fast negative spikes, right? The raw, ultra-fast negative spikes cannot charge a battery through its positive terminal. But what this system does is totally different, right? We're sending the back EMF to the negative terminal, which does not charge the battery, but it does slow down the battery's discharge. So what we kind of stumbled upon here is back EMF to the negative terminal could be an indicator of dipole preservation. Forward EMF directly to the load equals real usable power in our system. That's what's powering the load, the forward EMF alone. Pulse DC really fast. We just can't see that pulse because it's super fast. And we combine the forward and back EMF to get a synthetic AC that recycles the energy. So this explains why this battery can last for days, right? I use this fucking system all the time to light my apartment, and I rarely have to charge the battery as often as you would expect, like maybe once every 2 or 3 days. And I have this light on constantly. So it's sometimes I'll run it way past what I really should, just because I have a Bedini SSG that if there's any kind of sulfation in the battery, you know, I can because it'll run like to 8 fucking volts. This system, it'll squeeze the battery real fast. Once you get like past like a certain point, like 11 volts, it discharges kind of fast. But it'll use up like all the energy in the battery. So you have to be aware of that. And sulfation is a real thing that happens when the battery gets past a certain point. But I don't have to worry about that because we just have to charge that thing with the Bedini SSG, and it charges right back up to 13.2 volts. So. So society says, does this involve splitting the positive, keeping the dipole alive? I guess so. That's an interesting question. I didn't think about it like that. Yeah, splitting the positive and the negative, maybe that's the way you keep the dipole alive. Interesting. I guess that would be a simple way of understanding it, yeah. If this is a method of really preserving the dipole, which I don't see why it wouldn't be, considering we got the observational data we did. Oh my God, Mike's talking about something else. Mike, you dirty dog. Oh my. Oh my. Hey. Mike's over there crunching the numbers.
Crunching the numbers.
Yeah.
Chipping away.
It's complicated.
It is, yeah. Did you have a question?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, I'll get back to it then.
Oh, man. Back to it then. All right, back to it then. So, as I was saying, the dipole preservation theory does explain why the battery lasts for days. You know, the system is stable. The heat is very minimal. You know, I've obviously run this thing for days at a time, and it doesn't overheat. It doesn't, fry out anything. Everything's pretty stable. The only thing that you really got to watch for is the neon lamp. That will degrade over time. Especially if the wrong resistance is attached, which I did have the wrong resistance attached. But still, even with this new setup, this neon lamp is probably going to die out, after a few months. So you got to watch that. But you can see the signs of the neon lamp degrading. It starts to get kind of black and dim and dull. But the heat is minimal. The waveform looks asymmetric but resonant. This is really what explains it, because this is where the asymmetry comes in that I was referring to before in the intro segment of this podcast. So the waveform, when we look at the resonant pulsed waveform of our system, is a bunch of asymmetric bouncing nested harmonics when you look at it on a normal scale, right? Then you zoom out on the macro scale and you kind of see this smooth sine wave formed from all this chaos. So this all explains why the efficiency feels way beyond a normal Joule thief. So the high-speed diode mystery has been solved. You know, the load got brighter when the high-speed diode, the resonance relay, is attached to the positive output of the lightning thief. Even though I thought it would block power, right? I was thinking about it. I'm like, wouldn't the diode be blocking the power? But no, it's blocking the back EMF from going back through the positive rail. The small positive pulses still power the load, though, okay? The diode prevents the collapse pulse from going forward. So the collapse pulse is redirected backwards towards the battery's negative terminal. That's its path of least resistance there, back towards the negative terminal. And the load gets a, you know, positive pulse, or the load gets a cleaner positive pulse as a side effect. So you get that clean positive DC pulse, which also explains why this is powering this really, really nicely and really efficiently, rather, because it's probably pulsed DC. Now the panel, these panels can handle pulsed DC. They just can't handle a steady current DC. But that aside, this is all exactly how asymmetric systems behave. You know, we're indirectly boosting the efficiency by properly routing the reverse power. Basically, that's how you summarize it in a nutshell. So this is going on to my field cavitation theory. Now, I did have a chance to email this theory to Malcolm Bendel, the inventor of the thunderstorm generator, and he developed the plasmoid unification model. And when thinking about the plasmoid unification model and how this system is actually producing some of the unique effects, I had kind of a unique insight, and I wanted to run it by him, and you guys, of course, to see what you think in terms of how this system is actually achieving some of the unique effects. So before we go into the theory of field cavitation, I want to put things in perspective with how bubble cavitation works. So we're going to watch a quick chapter from my series Divine Science, which is a highly produced documentary or documentary series that goes into some of the basic fundamentals and principles of this new plasma technology. So we're going to watch a short chapter from Divine Science. And if you haven't seen this documentary, I highly suggest you go on my channel, click videos, click popular, and it's like the second or third video. It's called Thunderstorm Generator. It's a documentary on the thunderstorm generator, plasmoid unification model, and how it kind of connects to vortex-based mathematics and specifically my research with the coils. So here is how bubble cavitation works. To give you a little reference before we go into field cavitation.
So, just what our plan. So, just what are plasmoids?
Seth Putterman called it the star in a jar.
Microscopic ball lightning in the shape of a self-contained imploded sphere. These plasma spheres take on the shape of a torus due to the fact that they collapse in on themselves symmetrically. Plasmoids are found in nature. They are everywhere. These quasi-stable clusters are what give thunderstorms and cyclones their enormous power. These same processes for channeling and utilizing plasmoid energy are replicated in the thunderstorm and plasmoid generators, where counter-rotating vortexes collide at specific angles within multiple spheres of specific ratios.
In the quantum physics is your event horizon. What it does, you have a positive and negative end, a north pole, south pole, two tornadoes colliding in the middle.
So, going back to the star in a jar experiment, you're creating bubble cavitation by inducing the cavitation with sound in that case. With that experiment, that would be considered bubble cavitation or water cavitation, and it does happen in nature at a microscopic scale. But here's the theory that I came up with regarding how my system might be working and connected to this, fractal universal principle of torsion physics specifically. Now, most people who know about bubble cavitation know that water moves fast, right? In this kind of effect. There's a low pressure pocket that forms. The bubble collapses violently. There's a huge pressure spike, a flash of light and heat. That's the plasma. And it collapses so fast that the water molecules, they change directly to plasma. Now we take that same process, right? And we replace water pressure with electromagnetic field pressure. And what that gives us is a process where magnetic field collapses so rapidly that they create a tiny vacuum pocket in the electric field structure, causing charge to rush inward violently. So why is it called cavitation? Because in both cases, a stable medium, such as water or an EM field, is suddenly pulled apart, creating a void, which then collapses with violent intensity. The cavitation is the collapse of a void. In fluids, void is pressure. In my coil, the void is field density. So then what exactly collapses then in an EM coil or an EM field with a coil? It's not a bubble, but it's a zone of reduced vector potential and reduced magnetic flux density. When the transistor turns off, okay, current stops extremely fast. Magnetic flux collapses inward. This creates a momentary pressure gap in the field. Charge rushes to fill it. The gap collapses, and this leads to a spike. That spike produces ionization, and that ionization could be producing microplasmoids. And this is all mathematically identical to cavitation dynamics, but in EM fields instead of fluid. So let's look at the key ideas again. In water, pressure collapses the bubble violently. But in our coil, in this theory, the field collapses the low flux cavity violently. This creates a massive negative voltage spike and ionizes the air in the coil's center. This could be what's creating the formation of charged clusters or exotic vacuum objects. Synthetic AC oscillation with extremely high Q factor ringing, rather. So these are all behaviors we've actually seen with the coil with our own eyes. So This actually aligns with the core ideas of the PUM, the plasmoid unification model by Malcolm Bendel. So Malcolm's model describes plasmoids as self-organizing EM structures formed by the interplay of collapsing fields, charge separation, and flux pinching. Field cavitation theory describes the formation of transient EM voids, or low-pressure zones, created by the collapse of a magnetic field. This is exactly the trigger that gives rise to plasmoids. In essence, field cavitation equals the mechanism of action at play here, and the plasmoid unification model equals the framework explaining the resulting structure or model of everything and how it's connected. So the closed circuit Rodin coil produces a soft field cavitation in this theory. The resulting microplasmoids fit perfectly with the PUM's idea that plasmoids can exist in a continuum of low energy symmetric forms to high energy asymmetric spikes. And that's exactly what we see with the oscilloscope. So the discovery here of synthetic AC from the combination of forward and back EMF superposition provides the energy orchestration the plasmoid unification model talks about. The field cavitation generates the void. The superimposed AC pulses feed it dynamically, and the resulting plasmoids are sustained or modulated without destroying the dipole. And here, I have a diagram of, I don't know, can I share this? I might be able to pull it up. But if you just type in Google, 1 second. Yeah, if you just type in Google magnetic reconnection, it'll show you a diagram. The diagram that I'm looking at, I don't know if I can pull it up from here. But in essence, the field cavitation theory is a phenomenon where a rapid collapse of a magnetic field creates a temporary low field void, which can lead to plasmoid formation in theory, at least. In mainstream plasma physics, though, the closest recognized process is magnetic reconnection, and this kind of fits, which produces similar energy releases and particle accelerating effects in nature. So magnetic reconnection is a process where oppositely directed magnetic field lines break and reconnect, converting magnetic energy into kinetic and thermal energy of plasma. This fundamental process occurs throughout the universe and is responsible for energetic events like solar flares, auroras, and the acceleration of high-energy particles in space. Now, I didn't actually know about magnetic reconnection until earlier this morning, actually. So, but this is very interesting because this sounds a lot like the theory demonstrated in mainstream physics. So the big takeaways here, we've kind of inadvertently built an asymmetric pulsed high Q resonant energy recycler. That's what it is. So we can now understand the system as, the forward EMF driving the load, while the back EMF is recycled back to the battery via the negative terminal to preserve the dipole in the system. The resonator has a high Q factor that resonates around 2 kilohertz, and is produced by a synthetic AC generation, the synergy between well-timed forward and back EMF. This energy recycler reduces the battery drain, right? And in theory, plasmoids form in the coil under certain conditions. Field cavitation is the formation of a temporary EM void during the rapid flux collapse. It is analogous to cavitation bubbles in water-producing plasmoid seeds. So field cavitation is the mechanism. Is the mechanism Malcolm's plasmoid unification model is the theoretical framework. And my core research might be practical evidence for the PUM or further evidence of the PUM. In other words, we didn't just build a Joule thief. We kind of built a proto-Bedini SG rodent hybrid system with kind of like an asymmetric feedback and a self-regulating dipole, something like that. But yeah, it seems to be somewhat preserving the dipole, so it's kind of like regulating it, and it's real progress, honestly. I'm really happy with the progress that we've made with the system, and we know exactly what we need to do now. Specifically attach that capacitor and resistor in series on the negative end back to the battery, in between the output rail and the battery. And that's basically all the updates in a nutshell. Before we end the stream here, I want to quickly go over something that I was reading about, and I learned about through, I think, I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast earlier, and they mentioned this company called the American Computers Company that supposedly was given materials from an extraterrestrial source to back engineer or reverse engineer. And I found this very fascinating because they were talking about how they actually had a website admitting to this and going into detail about some of the things that they developed. And one of the things that I learned that they actually kind of promoted, this company, was something called they reverse engineered something they claimed from the Roswell material called a superior transistor. They called it a transfer capacitor. And I found this very, very interesting. And it kind of got me motivated and inspired to maybe start making our own capacitors and maybe experimenting with asymmetric capacitors. But the transfer cap technology was described by the American Computer Company as a novel semiconductor device that was intended to replace the transistor, not combine it with an actual, capacitor. So, according to claims, it was a distinctive device. CEO Jack Schulman explicitly referred to their product as a semiconductor device we called the transfer cap, and it was an alternative. The company claimed the supercomputer design had no transitorized RAM and no using the transfer cap memory and CPU modules. So it was an alternative. But it had claims of superiority regarding switching speed. And this is what I found most interesting, because we want the fastest switching speed possible, right? We want the fastest, cleanest switches possible. But there's superiority claims on that, or that the T-cap, the transfer capacitor, was claimed to be vastly superior to transistors, requiring 15,000th of the power requirements of a normal transistor and capable of terahertz switching speed. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. So I just found that fascinating. It got me inspired to kind of like look into making our own capacitors. And I do work in construction, so once I find some good clay, we're going to make some ceramic material. So the big discovery this week is that my system doesn't charge the battery, really, in the traditional sense, rather, but it preserves the battery from discharging, which is even more interesting, in my opinion. Forward EMF runs the load, but the back EMF preserves the dipole, and the whole thing resonates at about 2 kilohertz, like a high Q coil. The more I tune it, the more it looks like in the early stages of a legitimate asymmetric energy recycling machine. It really does look like it's going to be capable of a lot more. I believe this is the start. This is the start. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining me this evening. Do we have any questions? Mike says you can use uranium experiments and Earth labs as your evidence, but then again, where's evidence that any uranium exists within any star? You cannot get close enough to take a sample. Yeah, sometimes you have to rely on secondary evidence or look at the effect rather than the cause itself. John Gray, Ben's cheeks are moving, bringing understanding that's light. I hope you're talking about my mouth cheeks. Okay, I don't think there's any questions. Everybody's just talking about something else. Oh, Society said cavitation is like when... Okay, I'm not going to read that. Yeah, okay. Everybody's fucking around tonight, I see. No, you're good. You're good, Society. Don't worry about it. But I'm going to call it a night. I might stream some video games. I don't know. I'm feeling a little up to it. So I do that to get ad revenue, mostly for the funding of the research that I do. So if you want to help fund my research and you don't have any money and you're really into it, just put on one of my live streams. Specifically, the video game streams give a lot of ad revenue if you watch and don't skip the ads. So anytime somebody does that, it's much appreciated. There's much love there for all you guys. I appreciate you all for hanging out and tuning in with all of my ramblings this evening. So with that, I'm going to call it a night. Have a good evening. Don't forget to hit that like button on the way out. Have a good night, everybody.
Changing the system, we're treated like a toy. Ideas misunderstood, but brilliance is his boy. Benefactor boy, can't you hear his voice? Talking about 0 point to point. Kevin structures coming from the same old Sam. They laugh like I'm crazy, but I see it all so clear. Exploited labor, unnerving justice, burning ears. Fighting for a change in this wasteland of noise. But they call me foolish words, each and boys. Benefactor boy, dreaming about the world he can't deploy. Changing the system, we're treated like a toy. Ideas misunderstood, but brilliance is his boy. Benefactor boy, can't you hear his voice? Revolutions in the darkest nights. A dreamer with vision beneath the laughter and noise. A future so bright waiting for the right choice. Benefactor boy, dreaming about the world he can't deploy. Changing the system, we're treated like a toy. Ideas misunderstood, but brilliance is his boy.